Maria Santos wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished cleaning table number 15. It was another busy Friday night at Romano's fine dining, and her feet were killing her. She had been on her feet for 8 hours straight, serving rich customers who barely looked at her when she brought their expensive meals. To them, she was just another waitress in a black uniform. They had no idea about the secret life she lived after work. Every night when Maria got home to her small apartment, she would kick off her work shoes and sit down at her old piano. The piano was not fancy or new. She had bought it from a yard sale 3 years ago for $200. It was scratched and some keys stuck, but it was hers. And when she played it, magic happened. Maria had been playing piano since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother taught her the first songs on an even older piano in their tiny house. When her grandmother died, Maria kept playing because it made her feel close to her. She got better and better, practicing every day after school. By the time she was 18, she was good enough to get into the music program at the local college. But life had other plans for Maria. When she was 19, her mother got very sick. The doctors said she needed expensive treatment that their insurance would not cover. Maria had to drop out of college and get a job to pay the medical bills. She found work at Romano's restaurant, thinking it would be temporary. It was 3 years ago now. Maria was 22, and she still worked at the same restaurant. Her mother was better, but the bills never seemed to end. Every month brought new expenses, and Maria's dream of becoming a professional pianist seemed further and further away. But she never stopped playing. Every night, no matter how tired she was, she would play for at least 2 hours. Her neighbors sometimes complained about the noise. Mrs. Johnson, from upstairs, would bang on the floor when Maria played too late. Mr. Chen next door had asked her several times to stop playing after 10 o'clock, but Maria could not help herself. Playing piano was the only thing that made her feel alive after spending all day. Being invisible to customers who treated her like she did not matter, Maria taught herself new songs by watching videos on the internet. She could not afford piano lessons, so she learned everything on her own. She played classical music like Mozart and Chopin, but she also played modern songs and movie soundtracks. Sometimes she would make up her own songs, letting her fingers find melodies that came from deep in her heart. The hardest part of her job was working at special events. Romano's restaurant was fancy, and they often hosted big parties for rich people. There were charity dinners, wedding receptions, and business parties. At these events, professional musicians would come to perform while Maria served drinks and food. She would watch the pianists from across the room, her heart aching with jealousy and longing. They wore beautiful clothes and played on expensive, grand pianos. The guests would clap and smile, treating the musicians like stars. Meanwhile, Maria moved like a ghost between the tables, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates. But no one saw her. No one cared that she could play just as well as the performers on stage. Maria's co-workers at Romano's were nice enough, but they did not really know her. They knew she was quiet and hard-working. They knew she always picked up extra shifts when someone called in sick. They knew she sent most of her money home to help her mother. But they had no idea that she was a trained musician who could play piano better than most people they would ever meet. Sometimes Maria would arrive early for work and find the restaurant empty. On lucky days, there would be a piano set up for an evening event. She would look around to make sure no one was watching, then sit down and play a few notes. The sound of a good piano was so different from her old one at home. The keys were smooth and responsive, and every note rang out clear and beautiful. But she was always careful not to get caught. She was just a waitress, and waitresses were not supposed to touch the expensive instruments. She was there to serve food, not to make music. That was her place in the world, even though her heart belonged somewhere else entirely. One evening, as Maria served champagne at a fancy art gallery fundraiser, she overheard 2 women talking about their children's piano lessons. One woman was complaining about how much money she spent on her daughter's music teacher. The other woman said her son had been playing for 5 years and was still not very good. Maria wanted to tell them that talent could not be bought, that real love for music came from the soul. But she just smiled politely and asked if they needed more champagne. Maria's apartment was small and simple. She had a bed, a tiny kitchen, a small living room, and her piano. The piano took up most of the living room space, but she did not mind. It was the most important thing she owned. On the walls, she had hung pictures of famous pianists like Vladimir Horowitz and Martha Argerich. These were her heroes, the people. She dreamed of being like someday. Every morning before work, Maria would play one song. It was usually something calm and beautiful, like a Bach prelude or a Debussy melody. It helped her get ready for another day of being invisible. Every night after work, she would play until she was too tired to continue. Sometimes she played angry, fast pieces when she was frustrated. Sometimes she played sad, slow pieces when she felt lonely. The piano was her best friend, the only thing that truly understood her. Maria knew that most people would think her life was sad. A young woman with so much talent, wasting away as a waitress in a fancy restaurant. But she tried not to think about it that way. She was grateful to have a job. She was proud that she could help her mother pay for medical treatment. She still had her music, even if no one else ever heard it. But deep in her heart, Maria dreamed of more. She dreamed of wearing a beautiful dress and playing on a grand piano while people listened with respect and admiration. She dreamed of making enough money from music to quit her job at the restaurant. She dreamed of her mother being proud too. Tell people that her daughter was a professional pianist. These dreams felt impossible most days. But every night when she sat down at her old piano, Maria allowed herself to believe that maybe, somehow, someday, her secret life would become her real life. She had no idea that this someday was coming much sooner than she could ever imagine. It was a cold Tuesday evening in November when Maria arrived at Romano's restaurant for what she thought would be just another ordinary shift. But tonight was different. Tonight was the Metropolitan Arts Foundation's biggest fundraising event of the year. The restaurant had been decorated with white flowers and golden lights. Crystal glasses sparkled on every table. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the aroma of gourmet food. Maria had worked at events like this before, but never one this fancy. The tickets cost $500 each, and only the richest people in the city could afford to come. She recognized some faces from newspapers and magazines, business owners, politicians, and celebrities. They all looked perfect in their designer clothes and expensive jewelry. As Maria put on her black uniform in the staff room, her manager, Mr. Rodriguez, gave everyone special instructions. "This is our most important event of the year," he said. "Seriously, these guests are very important people. Be extra careful with everything. No mistakes tonight." Maria nodded along with the other servers. She was used to serving rich people, but tonight felt different. There was more pressure in the air. Even the kitchen staff seemed more nervous than usual. The chef was yelling at everyone to make sure every dish was perfect. The star of tonight's event was supposed to be Jonathan Hartwell, a famous pianist from New York City. Maria had heard of him before. He was one of the most respected classical pianists in the country. He had played with symphony orchestras all over the world. The event organizers had paid him $20,000 just to come and play for 1 hour. A beautiful grand piano had been placed in the center of the dining room. It was a black Steinway piano that probably cost more than Maria would make. In 5 years, special lights had been set up around it to make it look like a concert hall. Maria stared at the piano as she walked past carrying a tray of appetizers. Her fingers itched to touch those perfect keys. The evening started smoothly. Maria served champagne and fancy appetizers to guests who barely looked at her. She listened to their conversations about art, business, and politics. Some talked about their expensive vacations to Europe. Others discussed their children's private schools. It was a world completely different from Maria's daily life. Mrs. Patterson, the event coordinator, was rushing around making sure everything was perfect. She was a tall woman, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a navy blue dress and carried a clipboard everywhere she went. Maria had seen her at other events, and she was always stressed and demanding. At 8 o'clock, dinner was served. Maria and the other servers brought out plates of lobster, steak, and other expensive foods. The guests ate slowly and talked loudly about their important lives. Some of them sent their food back to the kitchen, complaining that it was too cold or not cooked right. Maria smiled politely each time and took the plates back to the angry chef. Jonathan Hartwell was supposed to perform at 9 o'clock, right after dinner. Maria had seen him earlier, talking to Mrs. Patterson near the piano. He was a thin man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a black tuxedo and looked very serious. He had tested the piano briefly, playing a few notes to check the sound. But at 8:30, something went wrong. Maria was clearing dishes from table 12 when she heard Mrs. Patterson's phone ring. The woman answered it quickly, stepping away from the guests to talk privately. Maria could not hear the conversation. She could see Mrs. Patterson's face getting more and more worried. After the phone call, Mrs. Patterson rushed to the kitchen area where the staff was working. Her face was pale, and her hands were shaking. She grabbed Mr. Rodriguez and started talking to him in a low, urgent voice. Maria pretended to be busy with her work, but she could hear some of what they were saying. "Food poisoning," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "Hospital, ... Can't perform tonight. What are we going to do?" Maria's heart sank as she realized what had happened. Jonathan Hartwell, the famous pianist that everyone had paid to see, was sick and could not come to the event. The guests had no idea yet, but soon they would find out that the main entertainment for the evening was canceled. Mrs. Patterson immediately started making phone calls, trying to find another pianist who could come at the last minute. She called up every music agency in the city, but it was too late. All the professional musicians were either already performing somewhere else or could not get to the restaurant in time. Maria watched from across the room as Mrs. Patterson became more and more desperate. The woman was pacing back and forth, her clipboard forgotten on a nearby table. She made call after call, but each conversation ended with disappointment. Some pianists were out of town. Others wanted too much money. A few said they could come tomorrow, but that was no help tonight. The guests were finishing their dinner and starting to look around expectantly. They knew the performance was supposed to start soon. Some of them were checking their expensive watches and talking quietly among themselves. A few had already asked Maria when the music would begin. At 8:45, Mrs. Patterson made another desperate phone call. Maria could hear her voice getting higher and more stressed with each conversation. "Please, you have to help me," she said into the phone. "These people paid $500 each to hear classical music tonight.
What?
Can't just tell them there's no performance?" But every call ended the same way. No one could help. No professional pianist was available on such short notice. Mrs. Patterson was facing a disaster that could ruin her reputation and embarrass the Arts Foundation in front of the city's most important people. Maria continued working, carrying dirty dishes and refilling water glasses, but her mind was focused on the crisis unfolding around her. She could feel the tension in the air as the staff realized what was happening. The servers were whispering to each other about what would happen when the guests found out by 9 o'clock. Mrs. Patterson was near tears. She had called everyone she could think of, but there was no solution. The beautiful piano sat silent. In the center of the room, surrounded by lights that now seemed pointless, the guests were starting to get restless, some of them asking loudly when the performance would begin. Maria's heart was pounding as she watched the disaster unfold. She knew she had the skills to help, but the idea seemed impossible. She was just a waitress. These people had paid to hear a world-famous pianist, not the girl who had just served them dinner. But as she watched Mrs. Patterson's desperate face and saw the disappointment beginning to spread through the crowd, Maria realized that sometimes impossible situations called for impossible solutions. The evening that had started so perfectly was turning into a nightmare, and Maria Santos was the only person in the room who could save it. Maria's hands were shaking as she carried a tray of empty wine glasses toward the kitchen. She could hear Mrs. Patterson on the phone again, her voice getting more desperate with each call. The woman was now offering double pay, triple pay, anything, to get a pianist to the restaurant in the next 30 minutes, but every conversation ended the same way. With disappointment and growing panic, the guests were starting to notice that something was wrong. Maria could see them checking their phones and looking around impatiently. A few were already complaining to their friends about the delay. One man in an expensive suit had called Mr. Rodriguez over to his table and was demanding to know when the music would start. As Maria walked past the beautiful grand piano, she felt like it was calling to her. The black surface gleamed under the special lights, and she could imagine how smooth the keys would feel under her fingers. She had dreamed so many times about playing a piano like this one. But dreams and reality were two very different things. She stopped walking and just stared at the piano for a moment. In her mind, she could hear the opening notes of Moonlight, Sonata, one of her favorite pieces by Beethoven. She had played it hundreds of times on her old piano at home, but she had never played it on an instrument this beautiful. Her fingers moved slightly, as if they were already touching the keys. "What am I thinking?" Maria whispered to herself. The idea was crazy. She was a waitress, not a concert pianist. These people had paid $500 each to hear Jonathan Hartwell, one of the most famous musicians in the world. They did not want to hear some unknown girl who served their food. But as she watched Mrs. Patterson make another failed phone call, Maria felt something stirring inside her heart. It was not just sympathy for the stressed event coordinator. It was something deeper, a voice that had been quiet for too long, telling her that this might be her only chance to show the world what she could do. Maria thought about her mother. Lying in the hospital bed just 6 months ago, during one of her visits, her mother had taken her hand and said, "Maria, promise me something. Promise me you will never completely give up on your dreams. Sometimes life gives us unexpected chances, and we have to be brave enough to take them." At the time, Maria had smiled and promised, but she had not really believed it would happen. Her dreams seemed too far away, too impossible for someone in her position. But now, standing next to this beautiful piano while chaos unfolded around her, she wondered if this was the unexpected chance her mother had talked about. The internal battle in Maria's mind was fierce. On one side was fear. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of losing her job. What if she made mistakes? What if the guests laughed at her? What if she forgot the notes to the songs she knew so well? The risk seemed enormous. On the other side was opportunity, the chance to finally show her talent, prove that dreams could come true, to save an event that meant so much to so many people. She thought about all those nights practicing alone in her apartment, playing for no one but herself. What was the point of having talent if she never used it when it mattered? Maria looked around the room at the frustrated guests, the worried staff, and Mrs. Patterson, who was now sitting in a chair with her head in her hands. The woman looked defeated, like she had given up hope of finding a solution. In a few minutes, she would have to make an announcement that would disappoint everyone and possibly ruin her career. Then Maria remembered something her grandmother had told her when she was just 8 years old and learning her first piano piece. "Music is not about being perfect, Maria," her grandmother had said. "Music is about sharing your heart with other people. When you play from your heart, people will listen." The memory gave Maria strength. Maybe these guests had paid to hear Jonathan Hartwell, but music was music. If she could play well enough to move people, to make them feel something beautiful, maybe it would not matter that she was just a waitress. Maybe for one night, she could be something more. Maria set her tray down on a nearby service table and took a deep breath. Her heart was beating so fast, she thought it might jump out of her chest. She had never been so scared and so excited at the same time. This was the biggest risk she had ever taken in her life. She walked slowly toward Mrs. Patterson, who was still sitting with her head down, looking completely defeated. The woman did not notice Maria approaching until she cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, Mrs. Patterson," Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Patterson looked up with tired red eyes. "Yes, what is it?" "I'm really busy right now trying to figure out this disaster." Ouch. Maria's mouth felt dry, but she forced herself to speak. "I heard about Mr. Hartwell being sick. I know you're looking for someone to play piano tonight." Mrs. Patterson stared at her blankly. "Yes, but unless you know a professional pianist who can be here in 20 minutes, I don't see how you can help." This was the moment. Maria took another deep breath and said the words that would change her life forever. "I can play piano. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm trained. I've been playing for 15 years. I know classical music, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin. I could perform tonight if you're willing to let me try." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in skepticism. She looked Maria up and down, taking in the black waitress uniform, the comfortable work shoes, the simple ponytail. This was not what a concert pianist looked like. "You're serious?" Mrs. Patterson asked slowly. "You really think you can perform classical music for this crowd?" Maria nodded, even though her whole body was trembling. "I know I don't look like a professional musician. I know this seems impossible. But I can play, Mrs. Patterson. I can really play. Give me a chance to prove it." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, looking back and forth between Maria and the silent piano. The guests were getting more restless by the minute. Some were already talking about leaving. The woman was facing a choice between certain disaster and taking a huge risk on a waitress who claimed she could save the night. Finally, Mrs. Patterson stood up and walked toward the piano. "Show me," she said simply. "Play something." "Right. Now, if you're as good as you say you are, maybe we can figure this out." Maria followed her to the piano, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. This was it, the moment, when her secret life would either become real or when she would face the most embarrassing failure of her life. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about, came down to the next few minutes at the keys of a beautiful piano. Maria's legs felt weak as she walked toward the grand piano. Every step seemed to echo in her ears, even though the dining room was full of talking guests. Mrs. Patterson followed closely behind her, still looking doubtful. The event coordinator's face showed a mix of desperation and disbelief. She needed a miracle. But she could not believe it might come from a waitress. The piano bench was exactly the right height, covered in soft black leather. Maria had never sat at such an expensive piano bench before. Her own piano at home had a wooden stool that wobbled. This bench was solid and comfortable, made for professional musicians who performed in concert halls around the world. "You going to play?" Mrs. Patterson asked quietly, glancing around to make sure no guests were watching them yet. Maria's mind raced through all the pieces she knew by heart. She needed something that would prove her skill immediately, something beautiful, but not too long. If she failed this test, the evening would be ruined and her chance would be gone forever. "Clair de Lune by Debussy," Maria said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "It's one of the most beautiful classical pieces ever written. If I can play this well, you'll know I can handle anything." Mrs. Patterson nodded nervously. "Okay, but keep it quiet. If this doesn't work, I don't. Want the guests to know what happened? I'll tell them we're still working on the technical difficulties." Maria placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for just a moment. The keys felt smooth and perfectly weighted under her fingers. This piano was so much better than anything she had ever played before. Each key responded exactly as it should. Ready to create whatever music she could imagine, she thought about all the times she had played this piece alone in her apartment. Clair de Lune meant moonlight in French, and Debussy had written it to capture the peaceful feeling of moonlight on water. Maria had always imagined herself playing it for a real audience someday, but she had never dreamed it would happen like this. Taking a deep breath, Maria began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, floating through the air like whispers. Her nervous energy transformed into pure musical expression as her fingers found their familiar patterns on the keys. This was what she had been born to do. The sound that came from the Steinway piano was incredible. Every note was clear and rich, filling the room with beauty that Maria had only dreamed about. Her cheap piano at home could never produce sounds like this. It was like the difference between a whisper and a song, between a sketch and a masterpiece. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open as she listened. This was not amateur playing. This was professional-level artistry. Maria's technique was flawless. Her interpretation was deeply emotional, and her musical understanding was sophisticated. The woman had expected maybe some simple songs, but this was concert-quality performance. As Maria played, something magical happened. The conversations in the dining room began to quiet down. Guests turned their heads toward the piano, surprised by the unexpected music. Some of them looked confused, wondering why a waitress was playing piano. But confusion quickly turned to amazement as they realized how beautiful the music was. Maria was completely lost in the piece now. Her eyes were closed and her whole body moved gently with the rhythm of the music. She felt every note in her heart, pouring 15 years of practice and love into each phrase. This was not just playing piano, this was sharing her soul with the world. The dining room grew quieter, and quieter as more guests stopped their conversations to listen. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Wine glasses sat forgotten on tables. People who had been checking their phones put them away and focused completely on the music coming from the center of the room. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen beside the piano, watching Maria's fingers dance across the keys with graceful precision. She had heard Clair de Lune performed by professional musicians many times, but rarely had she heard it played with such genuine emotion and technical skill. This young waitress was not just talented, she was gifted. As the piece reached its most beautiful section, Maria opened her eyes and saw that nearly every guest in the room was looking at her. But instead of fear, she felt a surge of joy. This was what she had always wanted, to share her music with people who could appreciate its beauty. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. The final notes of Clair de Lune faded into silence, and for a moment the entire dining room was completely quiet. Maria lifted her hands from the keys and looked at Mrs. Patterson, whose face had completely changed. The stress and panic were gone, replaced by wonder and excitement. Then the applause began. It started with one person clapping, then two, then suddenly the entire room erupted in appreciation. The guests were not just politely clapping, they were genuinely impressed. Some were even standing up, something that rarely happened at fancy dinner events. "My God," Mrs. Patterson whispered, leaning close to Maria so she could be heard over. The applause. "Where did you learn to play like that? That was incredible." Maria felt tears forming in her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I've been playing since I was 7, she said. "I studied at the community college before. I had to quit to work here. I practice every night at home." Mrs. Patterson shook her head in amazement. "Oh, this is unbelievable. You could be performing in concert halls, and instead you're serving tables at my events. Didn't you ever tell anyone about this talent?" Before Maria could answer, several guests approached the piano. A woman in an elegant red dress smiled warmly at her. "That was absolutely beautiful, dear. What's your name?" "Maria Santos," she replied, still hardly believing this was really happening. "Well, Maria Santos, you have an extraordinary gift," the woman said. "I've heard that piece performed by some famous pianists, but never with such feeling." More guests gathered around, all wanting to compliment Maria and ask questions about her musical background. Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside, her eyes bright with possibility. "Maria, I have a proposal for you," she said urgently. "The guests love you. If you're willing to perform for the rest of the evening, I can pay you what we were going to pay Jonathan Hartwell. I can promise you this won't be your last performance. I know people who need to hear you play." Maria looked around at the faces surrounding her, faces that now saw her not as an invisible waitress, but as a real musician with something valuable to offer. This was the moment her secret life was becoming her real life, and there was no turning back. Maria stared at Mrs. Patterson in disbelief. "You want me to perform for the whole evening?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The idea seemed impossible just an hour ago, and now it was becoming reality. "Yes," Mrs. Patterson said, firmly, her earlier panic completely replaced by excitement. "The guests love you. I've never seen a reaction like this at one of our events. You're exactly what we need tonight." Maria looked around at the faces surrounding the piano. These were the same people who had barely noticed her when she served their drinks and food. Now they were looking at her with respect and admiration. It was like she had become a completely different person just by playing one song. "But I'm still wearing my work uniform," Maria said, suddenly aware of how she must look in her simple black dress and comfortable shoes. Mrs. Patterson waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry about that. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places. These people care about talent, not fancy clothes." A distinguished older man in an expensive tuxedo stepped forward. "Excuse me, Miss Santos," he said politely. "I'm Dr. Williams, chairman of the Arts Foundation. Board. That performance was extraordinary. Would you be willing to play a few more pieces for us tonight?" Maria felt her heart racing again, but this time it was with excitement rather than fear. "Yes, sir. I would be honored." Mrs. Patterson quickly made an announcement to the room. "Ladies, And gentlemen, due to Mr. Hartwell's illness, we have a special surprise performer tonight. Please welcome Maria Santos, who will be providing our musical entertainment." The guests applauded enthusiastically as Maria returned to the piano bench. She had dreamed of this moment thousands of times, but the reality was even better than anything she had imagined. Her hands were no longer shaking as she placed them on the keys. For her second piece, Maria chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was one of her favorite romantic pieces, full of gentle melodies and complex emotions. As she played, she could see people closing their eyes to listen more deeply. Some couples moved closer together, holding hands as the beautiful music filled the room. The applause after the second piece was even louder than before. Maria smiled genuinely for the first time all evening, like she felt like she was floating, like this was all a wonderful dream that she never wanted to end. "What's next?" called out a woman from table 8. "Play something passionate." Maria laughed softly and chose Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a powerful and dramatic piece that would show off her technical skills. Her fingers flew across the keys with precision and strength, building two thunderous climaxes that made several guests gasp with amazement. When she finished, the entire room erupted in applause again. Some people were actually standing and cheering, something Maria had only seen in movies about concert halls. She felt tears of joy running down her cheeks as she realized that her impossible dream was coming true. Between songs, guests approached the piano to talk with her. A wealthy businesswoman asked for her business card. A music teacher from the university wanted to know if she gave lessons. A famous conductor asked if she had ever considered auditioning for orchestras. "I can't believe you've been serving tables." "When you have talent like this," said an elegant woman in pearls, "you should be performing professionally." Maria played for more pieces throughout the evening: a gentle Bach prelude, playful Mozart sonata movement, a mysterious Debussy arabesque, and finally, a triumphant Beethoven piece that brought the house down. Each performance was met with increasing enthusiasm from the crowd. By the end of the evening, Maria had business cards from music agents, invitations to audition for performing opportunities, and requests to play at private parties and events. Mrs. Patterson had already offered her a permanent position as Romano's featured pianist, with a salary 3 times what she made as a waitress. "You'll never have to carry another tray," Mrs. Patterson promised. "We'll build our evening events around your performances. You're going to be the reason people come to Romano's." But the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Williams approached her after her final song. "Miss Santos," he said seriously, "the Arts Foundation awards scholarships to talented young musicians. I would like to personally sponsor your return to music school. You have too much talent to waste." Maria felt like her heart might burst with happiness. "You mean I could finish my degree?" she asked, hardly daring to believe it. "More than that." Dr. Williams smiled. "I know the dean of the music conservatory. With talent like yours, you could be studying with the best teachers in the country." As the guests began to leave, many stopped to congratulate Maria one more time. She received more compliments in one evening than she had in her entire life. People were already asking when they could hear her play again. Maria's co-workers gathered around her in amazement. "We had no idea you could play like that," said Jennifer, another waitress. "You've been hiding this incredible talent from all of us." "I was scared," Maria admitted. "I thought people would think I was just a dreamer who didn't know her place." "Your place is on that piano bench," said Mr. Rodriguez, the manager. "I'm proud to have you working here, but I'm even prouder to see you sharing your gift with the world." As Maria finally sat down after the last guest had left, she looked at the beautiful piano that had changed her life in one evening. Her old uniform felt different now, not like a symbol of limitation, but like a reminder of how far she had come. She pulled out her phone and called her mother. "Mama," she said, her voice full of joy, "you'll never believe what happened tonight. Remember when you told me to watch for unexpected chances? Well, I found mine." Maria Santos had walked into Romano's that evening as an invisible waitress with secret dreams. She was leaving as a recognized musician with a bright future ahead of her. Sometimes the biggest changes in life happen in the most unexpected moments. When we find the courage to share our hidden gifts with the world, the girl who had played Piano alone in her apartment for years, would never be alone with her music again. The world was ready to listen, and Maria was finally ready to be heard.